feel like it's pretty well assumed that most people who are using Logic Pro at one point in time were likely using GarageBand. You know, you get your first MacBook, you open up GarageBand, get started recording music, and then eventually you just decide that you would like to upgrade to Logic for more features, whatever it may be. However, that just wasn't the case for me. I actually started recording music on a PC, and the first DAW that I used was Reaper. However, once I got my MacBook, I did decide to purchase Logic. I bring all that up because today's video is focused entirely on GarageBand versus Logic. I want to see if there's even any point in upgrading to Logic. I mean, can you continue to hone your home studio recording craft in GarageBand, or is there eventually a ceiling with GarageBand that you can only get through if you upgrade to Logic? Whenever I was trying to decide the best way to go about comparing these two programs, I had considered recording the tracks in Logic, bouncing the raw tracks, and then just doing a mixed comparison in GarageBand versus Logic. However, there are several factors that I would like to hit on, and one of the really main ones being just workflow. And I feel like the workflow of recording a song in GarageBand will be just as different as recording the song in Logic as it is for mixing a song in GarageBand versus mixing a song in Logic. With that being said though, I'm going to be using third-party guitar tones and third-party drum sounds. In addition to my third-party guitar tones and drum sounds, I will also allow myself to use third-party plugins because both programs are capable of using third-party plugins, so I don't really think it makes sense to limit ourselves to only the plugins in GarageBand or Logic. So with all that being said, the main differences that we're going to take a look at are going to be completely inherent to the programs and the workflow. If you guys enjoyed today's video, please do hit that like button as well as the subscribe button if you'd like to see more videos from me in the future. Let's go and get into the video. So seeing how Logic is the premium product between the two, I want to take a look at Logic first to kind of set a baseline of things that I've basically just come to assume are going to be in the DAW. With that being said though, I am going to take a look at three different sections. So we're going to take a look at basic navigation, tracking, and mixing. And then we will hop into GarageBand after this to take a look at it. But first, let's get into Logic. So in Logic, this is my main track view, and as you can see, this kind of pertains to mixing and to navigation and organization in the project, but I have multiple folders basically here, and these are called track stacks. So I have my rhythm guitar track stack, my leads, toms, overhead room samples, and bass. Track stacks are probably one of the coolest features of Logic because I could totally be wrong about this technically, but I've effectively have replaced sending things to an initial bus. So if I want to have a drum bus, instead of sending all my different drum channels to a bus, I have kind of exchanged that for track stacks. Say you have 3 different kick mics. Instead of sending all those to a kick bus and then sending that kick bus to a drum bus, I'll just make a kick track stack and then send that to the drum bus. And to me, that is just kind of less routing, and it kind of helps me keep it straight in my mind. So track stacks are a huge plus. Another thing that I use 24/7 in Logic is the mixer view. You have your faders, and then you have all of your inserts and your sends right here. I use the mixing view all the time. Another thing that I do in Logic pretty often is to just select all of my channels, and then I can mute those or select those. You would think that that would just be just a normal thing. However, I have not found a way to select multiple channels in GarageBand, and I feel like that is not right. So we'll take a look at that again whenever we get back to GarageBand, but I was not able to find a way to select multiple tracks. Another really important part of just basic workflow in Logic is the inspector window, and basically you can be on any channel and press I and it's going to bring up your inspector channel, and then I typically leave this inspector window open most of the time, unless I'm just, for some reason, if I'm in the mixer view, I don't have it obviously, but you know, then you go through your channels and it'll show you the plugins and the sends that you have on that channel. So as far as tracking goes, there's not too much to note as far as tracking goes. Recording basic WAV files and using MIDI is pretty similar in both products. However, I do want to take a look at a pretty important virtual instrument feature that you have in Logic that you do not have in GarageBand. This is something that, you know, a lot of people don't really use. However, if you're someone like me and you're recording modern metal in your home studio, being able to do this with your MIDI instruments is pretty important. So in Logic, you have the option to make a multiple output instrument. So if I were to do One Kit Wonder from Architects, if I were to pull up my mixer window, then I have this little plus sign right here, and I can add extra channels. And then I'm able to go into the plugin and send all of my outputs, or send all my drum channels to those outputs that I just made. Watch my waveforms down here. that's super helpful for me, so you can process the individual drum channels. If you're in GarageBand and you can't make multiple output instruments, then you have to do all of your stuff either in the plugin, if the plugin provides some kind of processing within the plugin, or you have to do a bunch of different bus processing. There are ways to work around that in GarageBand. However, it is not quite as easy as doing it in Logic. Logic is pretty much just a 2 or 3 step process. In GarageBand, you have to make multiple different virtual instruments, and then you're using a lot of processing power because you have multiple instances of contact or whatever the instrument is, and then you have to put your individual MIDI notes on each channel. So you have basically a kick channel and just kick MIDI, snare MIDI, toms, so on and so forth. It can be very, very heavy on your CPU. And then so finally, to take a look at mixing. Mixing is pretty different in Logic compared to GarageBand. Like I said earlier, you do have access to third-party plugins on both programs, kind of. But a really, really big thing that I do in mixing, and a lot of people do in mixing, is to send their channels to different auxiliary channels. So these leads are being sent to a different reverb channel. All of these drum mics are being sent to an all drums bus that is getting compressed. And then all of my stuff is getting sent to a 2-bus channel before it hits my stereo out, and that's where I do pretty much all my bus processing or my mastering, technically. I have channels being sent to a parallel compression bus. I have just an instrument channel with more compression on it. So without the ability to send channels to auxiliary channels, it's really difficult to do parallel processing or bus processing unless you are, well, really the bus processing is kind of impossible in GarageBand, except for like your main master channel. And then the parallel processing is only possible if the plugin has a mix knob, basically. So while you do have access to third-party plugins in both programs, the inability to send channels to auxiliary channels and buses is pretty detrimental in GarageBand, in my opinion. I may remember something later, but I think that's it right now. Let's go ahead and hop into GarageBand. Okay, so here I am in GarageBand, and the basic interface does look very, very similar. It is a very familiar looking interface if you use Logic. We'll take a look first at basic navigation and project kind of navigation and management. So like I said earlier, I couldn't figure out a way to select multiple channels. So I'm holding shift, trying to click multiple channels, no can do. This FN button, nope. Control, no. Option, command. So I mean, maybe I'm just being really ignorant, but I can't find a way to select multiple channels, which is kind of weird to me that you can't select multiple channels. If you wanted to record multiple channels at the same time, that seems to be something that would be difficult to do in GarageBand versus Logic. Another pretty huge thing that GarageBand is missing out on in comparison to Logic is the mixer view. There's no mixer view. If you know, the shortcut for the mixer view in Logic is Command 2 or X. If I press both of those, nothing happens. All of your mixing and pretty much all of your processing is going to happen in this track view. So without a mixer view, something that would be really kind of cool to have would be the inspector window. However, GarageBand also does not have the inspector window. I think kind of the alternative would be this control panel that you get if you press B. This is the control panel that GarageBand kind of throws up in front of you, and they have something called smart controls that it seems like they want you to use. I didn't really use the smart controls at all as I was working in GarageBand. They just don't feel very intuitive. I navigated more towards this plugins window, which by default is like this, and you have to drop it down. This is more similar to the inspector window in my opinion, and you can have your instrument and then any kind of inserts you want to have. So as far as project navigation goes, it's pretty similar other than those 2 or 3 things that I just highlighted. You can pull up your MIDI roll with the E shortcut, the same you can do in Logic, so that was not too detrimental there. So let's take a look at tracking. Tracking, like I said earlier when I was in Logic, is very, very similar. There are, as far as just recording basic waveforms goes, there's really no difference there. I mean, the interface over here on the side for input monitoring and for setting something to record is a little different. The biggest difference is being unable to have a MIDI instrument with multiple outputs. So let's take a look at this drums, and I had to do all of my processing on the actual channel itself. For instance, here's a pretty good example. I was not able to split up my kick and all my other channels separately. So instead of processing just the kick to get a little more low end out, I just did a boost on the whole bus, and then I added some shimmer to say my overheads, whatever, by doing a boost to the high end. But as you can see, there are no individual drum channels at all. The only drum channels are that one stereo output. However, I guess that could be beneficial in the sense that you have less stuff to mess up if you can only process the stereo channel. So if you're using really good samples like I was, then they're going to sound pretty good. So with tracking out of the way, we can take a look at mixing, and mixing was pretty immensely different in GarageBand versus in Logic. First off, I have said multiple times in this video that you can use third-party plugins in both GarageBand and Logic. However, there's kind of a little bit of an asterisk beside that in GarageBand. Whenever I was pulling up probably 60 or 75% of my plugins, I got an error message from GarageBand saying that the plugin needed to be updated, which was not the case. All my plugins were up to date. So after some Googling on how to fix this issue, I eventually came to the conclusion that I needed to go to my terminal window in my computer and bypass the gatekeeper, whatever the world that means. I don't even know what I've done to my computer. All I know is that I can use Trigger in GarageBand now. So while I was able to use my plugins eventually, I did have to jump through a few hoops to get there. But other than that, really the biggest difference as far as mixing went was the inability to send any of my channels anywhere. You know, without the inspector window or without the mixer view, I only have this smart controls panel, and the only sends that you have are this master echo and this master reverb. So the only bus processing done on this entire project, arguably other than maybe the drums, because it's just a stereo output, so it's kind of like drum bus processing, is on this master output right here. And I've done all my stuff there. I have multiple different compressors there because I was trying to achieve the same amount of compression as I would if I were compressing throughout multiple stages of the project. I guess you could technically go through on your individual channels and compress and just copy and paste the compressor. You could probably do that in a way. You would probably be able to use more compression that way, in such a way that it may kind of emulate bus compression, but I don't think that would be the case because you wouldn't be activating the compressor in the same way. So I don't really know how there is a workabout for that. Ultimately, I do like having the options that you get from Logic, and it's kind of a shame that you don't get, you know, either the mixer view or the inspector window in GarageBand. I think that either one of those things would be very beneficial, but I understand that you got to keep your features for your premium products. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the video here. If there are any features that I left out between the two programs, please do leave that in the comments below. The music I'm making may not be the same music that you are making, so our workflows are going to inherently be a little different. So like I said, if there's anything I left out, please do leave that in the comments below. I also think it is kind of cool if you look back at the beginning of the video to the comparison between the two mixes. In my opinion, the GarageBand mix was significantly better than the Logic mix. I hands down prefer the tools that I have in Logic. Whenever I sat down to mix the GarageBand track, I don't know, I was just in a better state of mind and it just came out better. So I mean, that goes to show you you're not always limited by the tools that you use. If you guys enjoyed today's video, like I said earlier, please do hit that like button as well as the subscribe button, and I will see you guys in the next video.